Hi there. In this presentation, we are going to explore Moodle's private files functionality. By default in Moodle, each user has a private files area for uploading and managing their own set of files. It is also possible for that user to actually use those files in other areas of Moodle, as we shall see in this presentation. Until the end of September 2023, you can get a free ebook copy of the Introduction to Moodle 3.9 Plus plugin development book by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Follow the link to subscribe and to claim your copy. So now I'm going to log in as a student. The name is Tool Generator because I've used the development tool to generate the data for this presentation, and I'm going to log in. So wherever you are in Moodle, as long as you've got access to the user menu, you have access to a private files area, to your private files area. So if I go to my courses, look in the user menu, it's there. If I go home and I look in my user menu, private files is there. And then you have your private files area. So I can upload files here. So here's a file, I'm going to upload it. You can also create folders. So let's create a folder, miscellaneous, and upload a file there as well. And then once you've got your files uploaded or you've made your changes, you can save your changes and you're told how much of your limit you've used. So we have that, and now we can actually use these files in other areas of Moodle. So if I go as a student to a course that I'm enrolled in, I can't do anything here. So the only real place I've got at the moment is to use the forums. So I'll select a discussion, I'll reply to a discussion. Now, to be able to add files, you have to go to the advanced, and we'll skip everything else here, and we'll just see whether we can insert an image from our repository. So I'll browse repositories, and down here I have private files, and they are my private files. So I can select a file and add it to the discussion. So I can add it to the discussion and save that. And you can see I've got my image in there. Now there's a slight difference between a student using a file in other areas of Moodle and a teacher. So let's have a look at what it looks like as a teacher. So I'll log out. So I'll log in as a teacher. And again, the same usual thing, wherever you go, as long as you've got the user menu, you've got access to private files. And in this case, I've already uploaded files for this user. So we've got some files here, and so I don't need to save that. What I need to show you is how it works when you are adding the file as a teacher. So here, what I'm going to do is I'll turn on edit mode, and I will add one of my files. So I'll go and add a file, and I'm going to choose a file, and again I've got access to my private files. So let's take this one and select this file. Now before I select this file, you'll notice that there are two options here. I can link to the file, or I can make a copy of the file. This is where it's different from the student situation that we saw earlier. So I'll select this file and I'll add it in here. Now I want to keep this, so I'm going to save and return to course. So let's have a look at the linked file. So I can do something like this, and let's call this the linked file. And again, I'll fill in and choose another file. We'll choose the Zimbabwe flag, and we'll save that. So save and return to course. And I'm just going to add one more in there for what happens when we delete a linked file. So it's obvious that there's a link of a file, so there's one copy of the file with a link to it, an additional link to it. So what would happen if we delete it? So let's do the same thing. Let's call this linked and delete file. Fill in a a description, and we'll add a file, and we'll take one out of our, and I'm going to click link to this file as well, and I'm going to save it in this course. So now we're going to go ahead and delete that file that we've just added into this course, and we'll go IBM and delete that and say OK and save our changes. Now we'll see what happens with it, and to show you that, I'm going to actually log out as teacher and log in as a student and go to that course. So logging back as a student, and I go to my courses, and it was the first course where we had our files. And if I click on the linked and deleted file, remember this file has been deleted, I still have access to the file. So let's log out again. So now let's see what happens if we remove access to the private files area, the repository itself in Moodle. So I'm going to log in as admin, and I'm going to navigate to site admin, go to plugins, go down to repositories, manage repositories, and I'm going to go down here, and we've got our private files repository, and you have three options here: enabled and visible, which is the default; enabled but hidden, which hides the repository in the file picker, which is very similar to what disabled does, and disabled completely. So I'm going to disable it completely like that, and we'll see what that looks like to our users. So I'll log out. So now I'll try and log in as teacher. I'll go to my private files area. As you can see, I've still got my files there. So let's go to courses, go back to my course, and let's see if we can try and add another file in there. So we're going to edit mode, add another activity or resource, go to files, and I'm not going to fill in this because I have no intention of saving it this time. I'm going to add, and you'll notice there's no access to private files here. Along here, private files is not available. So I cannot use files in my private area in other parts of Moodle because the repository is disabled. And now I'm going to put back the repository, but this time I'm going to take away the permission for you to manage your own private files, and we'll see how that works. So if I log in as admin again, go to site administration, let's first re-enable our repository. So I'll go back to down to repositories again, manage repositories, go down and find private files and make it enabled and visible again. We don't put a name for it. You can if you want to, it's optional. So we've now re-enabled the repository, private files repository. So if I now go to users, okay, and look at define roles, you have all your roles. Now if let's say you were working in a Moodle instance where you only wanted to remove this facility for certain users, what you'd have to do is define a brand new role and then prohibit the capabilities for that particular role to stop access. But this time I'm going to do it for all users. So all users are authenticated users. So I'll go in here, look for manage own files. You can see that's allowed. So we've got our capability to manage own files, and it's allowed. So what we're going to do is edit that and prohibit that, so users can't actually use that. So let's save that, and then I'll log out so we can see what effect that has. So I'll log back in as teacher again because it's easier to do it as teacher. If we go and try and look at our private files, we get this error. Now this isn't a very nice error, and this appears to be a bug in Moodle. In fact, what should happen is that we shouldn't have that appear in the user menu, but we'll see whether that changes in future versions of Moodle. So if I go to my courses, right? Go back to my first course. I've still got my files from previously, so that's the one of the files. Let's look at the linked and delete. It's still there. So let's see what would happen if I attempted to add a file from my private repository, if I happen to have private files. So if I come down here, I'm not going to fill this other stuff in because we're not going to save this, and you'll see private files is still available to me. The repository is still available, and because I've got existing files, I will be able to actually see the existing files that I have. Okay, so I could easily add something even though now I don't have access to that area. So I'm going to log out now and we'll try something else. So what I'm going to do now is restore the permission for you to use your private files area, but remove the permission to actually view the repository in the file picker. So I'll log in as admin. We'll go back. If you remember, our repository is still enabled. We can quickly check that. So go down, repository, manage repositories. Our private files is enabled and visible. So go back to users. Again, we're doing this for all users, so I'm doing it against the authenticated user. A reminder, going back, if you wanted to do this only for a select few of users, you would need to create a separate role. So I'll go into authenticated user, okay, and we're going to re-enable this this manage own files permission or a capability. So I'm going to allow that. But what I'm going to do is remove the repository view. Now the repository, the private files repository is called user, just to make things a bit complicated for no reason, but there you go. So now we're going to deny or prohibit access to that. So prohibit that, save changes, and then we'll go and see what that looks like. So this time I'll log in as a student for variety, and I'll go and look at my private files. I've still got my private files. If I go to my courses, go into a course, again I've only really got the forum where I can add files. So I'll pick a discussion, reply to one of the messages, go to advanced because that's where we can get access to our files, and try and insert an image into there. You'll notice that I now don't have access to private files in the repository. So the repository is on, but because I haven't got rights to view the repository, I don't get to be able to use the repository. So we've got two places where you can actually restrict access to private files in the file picker in Moodle. Okay, so I'll come out of that and I'll log out. Finally, now we can look at what Moodle recommends to stop access to private files for users. So I'm going to log in and go to site administration, and the advice is the repository must be turned off. So we go down here to our repositories, manage repositories, we find private files, we disable that. Okay, and then on top of that we need to go to our roles, and again we're doing it for all users, is we need to prohibit repository user view as well as manage own files. So at the moment we've got that allowed, so we're going to edit that and prohibit that. So now nobody should have access to private files via the file picker or through the private files area. So let's have a look at that in action. First of all, I'll log in as a teacher, right? If we go to our user menu, private files, again we've got that error, but anyway, we continue and let's go to one of our courses. So we'll go to our course file, course, and let's see if we can attempt to add a file or an activity, a file activity into this course. So click on that. no private files there, no access to private files, so I can't use that in this course. And we can quickly look at it from a student's point of view. Let's log in as a student. If we go to my courses, right, let's look at the private files. You see we still have that error. Go back to my courses, choose a course. Let's go into a forum as usual, pick a discussion, reply to something, go to the advanced, see if we can upload a file from our private files. No, we don't. So we don't have access to managing our files, we don't have access to using files in our private files area. Okay, so I'm going to log out. So let's review the situation, the private file settings. So full access, which is the default, your user repository is enabled and visible, your manage own files permission is allowed, your repository user view is allowed, and what you get is a visible option on your user menu. You've got access to the area and you can use it in the file picker. And then we work our way down, prohibiting and allowing different things to test out when you have access or when you don't have access to one or the other. So in the case of the second line there, we can see existing private files even though in fact we don't have access to our area, because we have both the repository on and we have the access to actually view that repository. Okay, that will see existing files, and then all the way down to no access, which is when you don't want anybody using private files, and then you still have the menu option visible, which I still think is a bug. Okay, so that is it for this video presentation. I hope you find it useful, and thank you very much for watching.